The cargo hall of Persistence shuddered as another wave of cosmic radiation washed over its hull. Marcus Chen gripped the control yoke tighter, his knuckles white against the worn plastic. The storm had been building for 3 days now, turning what should have been a simple supply run to the mining colonies into a nightmare of twisted space and deadly energy cascades. "Come on, old girl," Marcus muttered to his ship, watching the radiation meters spike into the red zone. "Just a few more hours and we're home free." The Persistence wasn't much to look at. 20 years of hauling freight across the outer rim had left her scarred and patched, her hull a patchwork of repairs and jury-rigged modifications. But she was reliable. And in the dangerous space lanes between human colonies, reliability meant survival. Marcus had been running cargo for most of his adult life. At 42, he was starting to feel every year of it in his bones. The constant exposure to low-level radiation, the stress of navigating through pirate-infested systems, the loneliness of months spent alone in the black, it all took its toll. But it was honest work, and it paid well enough to keep him fed and the ship running. The proximity alarm screamed to life, its shrill warning cutting through the ambient hum of the engines. Marcus's eyes snapped to the sensor display, expecting to see another chunk of debris or maybe a rogue asteroid. Instead, he saw something that made his blood run cold. A ship. Veltar design by the looks of it. And it was tumbling end over end, its hull breached in a dozen places, trailing a stream of frozen atmosphere and debris. Marcus had encountered the Veltar before. They were one of the more powerful alien species in this part of the galaxy, proud and territorial. Their ships were sleek, efficient killing machines, designed for speed and firepower. To see one of their vessels in such condition meant something had gone very, very wrong. His first instinct was to change course. The Veltar weren't exactly friendly toward humans. Oh, they tolerated human presence in their space, barely. But they made it clear that humans were considered a minor species, barely worth their attention. Getting involved with a damaged Veltar vessel could mean anything from a diplomatic incident to a summary execution. But as Marcus watched the dying ship tumble through space, something nagged at him. The vessel was small, barely a quarter the size of a standard Veltar cruiser. It looked almost like a civilian transport. He enhanced the sensor image, adjusting the filters to cut through the interference from the storm. What he saw made his stomach clench. The ship's hull bore the distinctive markings of a diplomatic vessel, but there was something else. Painted near the airlock in the flowing script of the Veltar language was a single word that Marcus had learned during his brief stint as a translator's assistant years ago. Velfara. Children. Damn, Marcus whispered, his hand hovering over the course correction controls. A diplomatic ship carrying children, caught in the storm and dying. Every rational part of his mind screamed at him to keep flying. It wasn't his problem. The Veltar had their own rescue services, their own protocols. They wouldn't thank him for interfering. But the ship's life signs were fading fast. Whatever rescue might be coming, it wouldn't arrive in time. Marcus closed his eyes and thought of his sister Sarah's kids back on Terra Nueva. Thought of how he'd feel if they were trapped in a dying ship while potential rescuers flew past, too concerned with politics to help. "Ah, hell," he muttered, and swung the Persistence toward the Veltar vessel. The approach was treacherous. The storm was intensifying, and the gravitic anomalies it created played havoc with his ship's navigation systems. Twice he had to pull back and recalculate as space itself seemed to twist around him. The Veltar ship was caught in the storm's grip, being pulled inexorably toward a massive energy vortex that would tear it apart within the hour. As he drew closer, Marcus could see the full extent of the damage. The ship's engines were dark, its hull breached in multiple places. Atmosphere was still venting from several wounds in the vessel's side, forming crystalline clouds that glittered in the storm's chaotic light. It was a miracle anything inside was still alive. He opened a communication channel, broadcasting on all standard frequencies. "Veltar vessel, this is the cargo hall of Persistence. Do you copy?" "I'm here to help," Static answered him. Either their communications were down, or they weren't interested in talking to a human. Marcus maneuvered his ship closer, using the Persistence's modest tractor beam to stabilize the tumbling Veltar vessel. It was delicate work. Too much force and he'd tear the damaged hull apart completely. But gradually he managed to stop the ship's spin and hold it steady relative to his own position. His ship's scanners were picking up life signs, but they were weak and fading. Whatever atmosphere remained inside the Veltar ship wouldn't last much longer. And the storm was still pulling both vessels toward that energy vortex. He had maybe 30 minutes before they were both torn apart. There was only one option. He'd have to suit up and go across manually. tried to evacuate whoever was still alive. It was insane. The space between the ships was filled with radiation and debris, and his EVA suit wasn't rated for this kind of exposure. But it was the only chance. Marcus sealed himself into his environmental suit, double-checking every seal and connection. The suit was military surplus, designed for combat operations in hostile environments, but even it had its limits. The radiation exposure alone would probably give him cancer in a few years, assuming he lived through the next hour. He cycled through the airlock and jetted across the void between the ships. The storm raged around him. Waves of energy that his suit's sensors couldn't even properly classify. Twice he was nearly knocked off course by invisible force fields that grabbed at him like phantom hands. But he made it to the Veltar vessel's hull and began searching for a way inside. The ship's main airlock was twisted and useless, its mechanisms fused by whatever had damaged the vessel. But he found an auxiliary port near the stern that seemed intact. His suit's cutting laser made quick work of the outer door, and he squeezed through into the ship's interior. The inside of the Veltar vessel was a nightmare. Emergency lighting cast everything in hellish red, and the air was filled with floating debris and crystalline formations where the atmosphere had partially frozen. The gravity generators were failing, creating pockets of weightlessness that sent loose objects tumbling through the corridors. Marcus followed his suit's life sign detector deeper into the ship, moving as quickly as he dared through the damaged corridors. The Veltar built their ships differently than humans did. Everything was taller and more angular, designed for their 7-foot frames and 3-fingered hands. Moving through it in his bulky EVA suit was like navigating an alien maze. He found the first body in what looked like a control room. A Veltar adult, probably female based on the bone ridge patterns Marcus half remembered from his cultural briefings. She was slumped over a control console, her pale blue skin already taking on the greyish tinge of death. A shard of metal had pierced her chest and her violet blood had frozen in crystalline patterns around the wound. The next compartment held 2 more bodies, both adults. Whatever had happened to this ship, it had happened fast. The Veltar hadn't even had time to seal the internal bulkheads properly, but his detector was still showing life signs somewhere ahead, faint but definitely there. Marcus pressed on, fighting through a collapsed section where the ceiling had partially caved in. His suit's oxygen supply was already down to 50%. He'd have to find whoever was alive soon, or they'd all die together in this metal tomb. He found her in what must have been a sleeping compartment, huddled in the corner behind an overturned piece of furniture. At first glance, Marcus thought it was another adult Veltar, but as he got closer, he realized his mistake. She was small, barely 4 feet tall, with the proportionally larger head and shorter limbs that marked her as a juvenile. A child, probably no more than 12 or 13 in human equivalent years. Her skin had the same pale blue coloration as the adults, but it was mottled with darker patches that Marcus recognized as the early stages of hypothermia. Her breathing was shallow and irregular, and her large dark eyes were closed. She was still alive, but barely. Marcus knelt beside her, his suit's medical sensors automatically scanning her condition. The readings were grim. Severe hypothermia, oxygen deprivation, and what looked like internal injuries from the ship's violent tumbling. She needed medical attention immediately, and his ship's modest medical bay was barely equipped to handle human injuries, let alone alien physiology. But he couldn't leave her here to die. Very carefully, Marcus gathered the unconscious child in his arms. She was surprisingly light, her bird-like bone structure making her feel almost fragile. Her body was so cold that ice crystals had formed on her clothing, and her lips, if that's what the thin slits in her face were, had turned a disturbing shade of purple. Getting back to his ship was even more treacherous with the child in his arms. He had to move slowly to avoid jostling her injured form, but every second's delay brought them closer to being consumed by the energy vortex. The storm seemed to sense their desperation, lashing out with renewed fury as they made their way through the dying vessel. When Marcus finally reached his ship's airlock, his oxygen supply was down to 15%, and his radiation exposure was well beyond safe limits. But he'd made it. He sealed the child into the medical bay's emergency treatment pod and began the delicate process of warming her core temperature while his ship's computer tried to analyze her alien physiology. As the Persistence pulled away from the doomed Veltar vessel, Marcus watched through the viewports as the storm finally claimed its prize. The ship dissolved into component atoms as the energy vortex tore it apart, taking with it any evidence of what had happened and why a diplomatic vessel carrying children had been traveling through such dangerous space. In the medical bay, the Veltar child lay unconscious in the treatment pod, her vital signs stabilizing but still dangerously weak. Her dark eyes occasionally fluttered open, revealing an intelligence that seemed far older than her apparent age. When this happened, She would look around in confusion before slipping back into unconsciousness. Marcus sat beside the pod, monitoring her condition and wondering what the hell he'd gotten himself into. He'd saved her life, but now what? He couldn't exactly drop a critically injured alien child off at the nearest spaceport. The Veltar would want answers he couldn't provide, and his own government would probably want to study her like a lab specimen. The child stirred again, her eyes opening to focus on his face with startling clarity. For a moment, they simply looked at each other across the vast gulf of species and culture. Then her lips moved, forming words in the musical language of her people. Marcus didn't understand the words, but he recognized the tone. She was afraid, lost, and alone in a strange place surrounded by aliens. He did the only thing he could think of. He reached out slowly and placed his hand gently on the pod's transparent cover, trying to convey through gesture what he couldn't say in words. "You're safe now. I won't let anything hurt you." The child's large eyes studied his face for a long moment, as if trying to read his intentions. Then, incredibly, she pressed her own small hand against the inside of the cover, aligning it with his. Her expression was still frightened, but there was something else there now. Trust. As the Persistence continued its journey away from the storm, carrying its unlikely cargo toward an uncertain future, Marcus couldn't help but wonder if he'd just started something that would change both their lives forever. The universe was vast and often cruel, but sometimes, just sometimes, it offered opportunities for something better. Sometimes it offered hope. 3 days later, Marcus was beginning to understand just how complicated his act of mercy had become. The Veltar child, who he'd started thinking of as Little One, since he couldn't pronounce her real name, was recovering physically, but her presence on his ship had created a host of new problems. For one thing, she was terrified of him. Every time Marcus entered the medical bay, she would press herself into the far corner of her treatment bed, those large dark eyes tracking his every movement with the wariness of a cornered animal. He couldn't blame her. To her, he was probably some kind of monster. Humans and Veltar had very different evolutionary paths, and what passed for a friendly gesture in one species might seem threatening to the other. The language barrier wasn't helping. Marcus had managed to dig up some basic Veltar vocabulary from his ship's database, but his pronunciation was apparently so awful that his attempts at communication only seemed to frighten her more. When he tried to tell her his name, she'd actually whimpered and hidden under the medical bay's thin blanket. "Okay," Marcus said to himself, settling into the pilot's chair and staring out at the stars. "Think, Chen. How do you communicate with a scared alien child who thinks you're probably going to eat her?" The answer, when it came to him, was almost embarrassingly simple. Food. Every species needed to eat, and sharing food was one of the most universal signs of peaceful intent across cultures. The problem was that Marcus had no idea what Veltar ate, and the Persistence's food synthesizer was calibrated for human nutritional needs. Feeding her the wrong thing could poison her. But his ship's database did contain some basic information about Veltar physiology, gleaned from the limited diplomatic contact between their species. They were omnivores like humans, but their digestive system was more sensitive to certain compounds. Anything too acidic or with high levels of sodium could make them sick. Marcus spent an hour programming the food synthesizer to create something that should be safe, a bland, protein-rich paste with minimal seasoning. It looked terrible and probably tasted worse, but it shouldn't hurt her. When he entered the medical bay carrying the bowl of synthetic food, Little One immediately pressed herself into her usual corner. But this time, Marcus didn't try to approach her. Instead, he sat down on the floor near the door and began eating from the bowl himself, making exaggerated sounds of enjoyment. "Mmm," he said loudly, taking another spoonful of the terrible paste. "Delicious. Really hits the spot." It was possibly the worst meal he'd ever eaten, but the performance had the desired effect. Little One was watching him intently, her head tilted to one side in obvious confusion. When Marcus set the bowl down and pushed it gently in her direction, she didn't immediately flee. It took 20 minutes of patient waiting, but eventually hunger overcame fear. The child crept forward like a nervous cat, grabbed the bowl, and retreated to her corner. She sniffed the contents suspiciously, took a tiny taste, then began eating with the desperate urgency of someone who hadn't had a proper meal in days. When she finished, she looked at Marcus with something that might have been gratitude. It was the first time she'd met his eyes without obvious terror. "Progress," Marcus murmured. Over the next few days, he established a routine. 3 times a day he would bring food to the medical bay and share a meal with his reluctant passenger. He never tried to get closer or force interaction, just sat quietly and let her get used to his presence. Gradually, little one began to relax. On the 5th day, she spoke to him. Marcus was in the middle of his usual lunch performance when he heard her voice, a soft, melodic sound, like wind chimes in a gentle breeze. He looked up to find her watching him intently, her small hands clasped in front of her chest. "Zarathek," she said clearly, pointing to herself. Marcus blinked in surprise. It was the first word she'd spoken since waking up. He pointed to himself and said slowly, "Marcus." She tried to repeat it, her unfamiliar vocal cords turning his name into something like Marcus. "Close enough." "Zarathek," he repeated, trying to match her pronunciation. Her face brightened. Apparently he hadn't butchered it too badly. She pointed to the bowl of food and said something in her own language. Marcus didn't understand the words, but the tone was clearly questioning. She was asking about the food, maybe where it came from, or what it was made of. Marcus stood up slowly and gestured for her to follow. After a moment's hesitation, Zarathek climbed down from the medical bed and padded after him on bare feet. She was still weak from her injuries, but she could walk without assistance. He led her to the ship's small galley, where the food synthesizer hummed quietly. Marcus pointed to the machine and made eating motions, trying to explain its function. Zarathek examined the device with the intense curiosity of a child, reaching out to touch its smooth surface before pulling her hand back nervously.
"It makes food," Marcus said, knowing she couldn't understand but talking anyway.
"Not very good food, but it keeps us fed. Better than starving, right?" Zarathek looked at him and made a sound that might have been laughter. It was a musical trill, like the call of some exotic bird. The sound made Marcus smile despite himself. The breakthrough came when Zarathek discovered the ship's observation lounge. The small chamber had transparent aluminum windows on 3 sides, offering a panoramic view of space. When Marcus showed her the room, she pressed herself against the forward window and stared out at the stars with an expression of wonder. She began speaking rapidly in her own language, pointing at various stars and nebulae. Marcus couldn't understand the words, but her excitement was infectious. She was trying to tell him something important about what she was seeing. Marcus activated his personal tablet and pulled up a star chart, showing their current position in space. Zarathek's eyes widened when she saw the display. She studied it for a long moment, then began pointing at different areas of the map while speaking urgently. "I wish I could understand you," Marcus said softly. "You're trying to tell me something important, aren't you?" Zarathek looked at him with frustration, clearly visible on her alien features. Then her face brightened as an idea occurred to her. She grabbed Marcus's hand and pulled him back to his quarters, chattering excitedly in her musical language. In his cabin, she picked up a digital stylus from his desk and began drawing on the tablet's surface. Her artistic skills were impressive. Within minutes, she had sketched a rough but recognizable star map. She pointed to one area and drew what looked like a ship, then made swooping motions with her hands. "Your ship," Marcus said, understanding. "That's where you were when something went wrong." She nodded vigorously, then drew another area of the map and sketched what looked like buildings or a city. She pointed to herself and made the same swooping motion, but in the opposite direction. "Home. You want to go home." Another nod, but this one was sadder. She drew stick figures around the buildings, adults and children. Then she drew X marks over some of them and pointed to the wreckage where Marcus had found her. "Your family was on that ship." Marcus felt his heart sink. The child had lost her family in whatever disaster had destroyed the diplomatic vessel. She was an orphan now, alone in a vast and dangerous universe. Zarathek seemed to sense his understanding. She set down the stylus and looked at him with those large, intelligent eyes. Then she did something that surprised him. She reached out and took his hand in her small, 3-fingered one. She spoke a single word in her language, and somehow Marcus knew exactly what it meant. "Thank you." Over the following days, their relationship continued to evolve. Zarathek was obviously intelligent, and she began picking up basic English words with startling speed. Marcus, in turn, started learning simple Veltar phrases. The conversations were halting and often required extensive use of gestures and drawings, but they were communicating. Zarathek told him, through a combination of words and pictures, that she was the daughter of a Veltar diplomat. Her family had been traveling to a peace conference when their ship encountered what she called a dark storm, apparently their term for the same energy phenomenon that had nearly killed them all. The ship's engines had failed, and they'd been unable to escape before the storm's gravity well trapped them. She was 12 years old in human terms, The Veltar age differently than humans. She was curious about everything, constantly asking questions about how the ship worked, what Earth was like, why humans ate such terrible food. Her questions often made Marcus laugh, which seemed to delight her. But as they grew more comfortable with each other, Marcus became increasingly aware of the problems ahead. He was already 3 days behind schedule on his cargo delivery, and his supplies were running low. More importantly, he had no idea what to do with Zarathek once they reached their destination. The mining colony of Perseverance Station was rough and dangerous, populated by hard men and women who scraped a living from asteroid rock. It was no place for a child, human or alien. And even if it were, the presence of a Veltar refugee would raise questions Marcus couldn't answer. He could try to contact the Veltar authorities, but that came with its own risks. The official diplomatic channels would want to know exactly what had happened to the ship, how many survivors there had been, why Marcus hadn't followed standard procedure and reported the incident immediately. And that was assuming they believed his story at all. Some Veltar factions were deeply suspicious of human motives. They might assume Marcus had somehow caused the disaster, or that he was holding Zarathek for some sinister purpose. The best-case scenario would be a lengthy interrogation and possibly criminal charges. The worst case would be a summary execution. There was another option, one that Marcus had been avoiding thinking about. He could simply disappear, change his ship's identification codes, alter course for the frontier colonies where record-keeping was spotty, and no one asked too many questions. He had enough saved up to start over somewhere else, maybe take up farming on one of the agricultural worlds. But that would mean cutting all ties with his old life, abandoning his cargo contracts and the reputation he'd built over 20 years of honest work. And it would mean taking responsibility for raising an alien child in a universe that didn't look kindly on such arrangements. As if sensing his troubled thoughts, Zarathek appeared in the doorway of the cockpit. She was wearing one of Marcus's spare shirts which hung on her like a tent, and carrying her tablet with another of her drawings. This one showed 2 figures, one tall and bulky like a human, one smaller and slender like a Veltar. They were standing together in front of what looked like a ship, and both figures were smiling. Above them, she had written a single word in careful English letters. Family. Marcus stared at the drawing for a long moment, feeling something tight and painful in his chest. He looked up at Zarathek, who was watching him with hopeful eyes. Family, she repeated carefully, her pronunciation much improved. Then she pointed to herself and Marcus. Ed! 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 Marcus closed his eyes and thought about his sister Sarah, safe on Terra Nueva with her husband and kids. Thought about the quiet, lonely years he'd spent crossing between the stars with only his ship for company. Thought about the scared, half-frozen child he'd pulled from a dying vessel, and how she'd slowly learned to trust him. When he opened his eyes, Zarathek was still waiting for his answer. Yeah, he said softly. Family. Her delighted trill of laughter filled the cockpit like music. Outside the viewports, the stars continued their ancient dance, indifferent to the small drama playing out in one tiny ship. But for Marcus and Zarathek, everything had just changed. Now all they had to do was figure out how to survive what came next. The first sign of trouble came when they were still 2 days out from Perseverance Station. Marcus was running a routine system check when his long-range sensors detected a ship following them, hanging back just at the edge of sensor range, matching their course and speed with suspicious precision. Zara, Marcus called, using the shortened version of her name they'd settled on. Come look at this. She padded into the cockpit, now moving with the easy confidence of someone who considered the ship home. Over the past week, she'd claimed the small storage compartment next to his quarters as her own space, decorating it with drawings and trinkets she'd fashioned from spare ship parts. Her English was improving daily, and she'd taught Marcus enough Veltar phrases that they could have actual conversations. What is it? She asked, settling into the co-pilot's chair that Marcus had adjusted for her smaller frame. We've got a tail, Marcus said, pointing to the sensor display. See that contact? It's been following us for 6 hours, staying just close enough to track us, but far enough away that I can't get a clear reading on it. Zara studied the display, her large eyes narrowing with concentration. Human ship? I think so. The engine signature looks like a Nakamura-class patrol boat. Probably military or law enforcement. They looking for me? The simple question hit Marcus like a punch to the gut. Of course they were looking for her. A Veltar diplomatic vessel disappears in a cosmic storm, and suddenly a human cargo hauler shows up carrying a Veltar child? It didn't take a genius to connect those dots. The question was how they'd found out. Marcus had been careful not to transmit any signals that might reveal Zara's presence, but maybe someone had gotten suspicious about his delayed cargo delivery. Or maybe the Veltar had their own ways of tracking their people. Maybe, Marcus said carefully, but they haven't tried to contact us yet. If they were official, they'd probably have hailed us by now. That was what worried him most. Official channels, however problematic, at least followed rules. Unofficial pursuit could mean anything from bounty hunters to slavers to worse. Marcus had heard stories about what happened to alien children who disappeared from diplomatic vessels. Some ended up in research facilities studied like lab animals. Others were sold to private collectors who wanted exotic pets. None of those stories ended well. "What do we do?" Zara asked, and Marcus could hear the fear creeping back into her voice. "We run," Marcus said, his hands already moving over the controls. Hold on. The Persistence might be old and battered, but she'd been modified for speed over the years. Marcus pushed the engines to their red line, feeling the ship surge forward as they accelerated away from their pursuer. The following ship immediately responded, increasing its own speed to match. Now there was no doubt they were definitely being hunted. "They're faster than us," Marcus observed grimly, watching the gap between the ships slowly shrink. "Professional job, too. They're not trying to disable us, just keeping us in sight." "Why not catch us?" Zara asked. "Because they're not sure what we'll do if cornered," Marcus said. "They want us somewhere they can control the situation. Probably waiting until we dock at Perseverance Station where they can corner us with nowhere to run." Marcus's mind raced through their options. He could try to lose them in the asteroid belt, but his pursuer probably knew these shipping lanes as well as he did. He could attempt to outrun them to neutral space, but they'd never make it with the other ship's speed advantage. There was another option, one that Marcus had hoped never to use. Hidden in the Persistence's cargo bay, behind a false bulkhead, was a collection of items from his previous life. Military-grade sensors, weapons, identification codes that could open doors better left closed. Marcus had been more than just a cargo hauler once. Before he'd bought the Persistence and started running freight, he'd been Lieutenant Marcus Chen of the Terran Marine Corps, specializing in deep reconnaissance and hostile environment operations. He'd left that life behind after one mission too many, seeking the peace and solitude of the merchant lanes. But some skills never faded, and some equipment was too valuable to simply throw away. "Zara, I need you to go to your room and stay there no matter what happens," Marcus said, his voice taking on the crisp authority he'd once used to command squads of soldiers. "Can you do that for me?" She looked at him with those intelligent eyes, seeing something in his expression that hadn't been there before. "You're different now."
"Yeah, well..."
"Sometimes we have to be different to protect the people we care about." Zara nodded sullenly and headed aft. Marcus waited until he heard her door seal, then began powering up systems that hadn't been active in 5 years. The hidden military sensors came online first, immediately providing a much clearer picture of their pursuer. It was definitely a patrol boat, but the configuration was wrong for any legitimate law enforcement agency. The weapons loadout was too heavy, and there were modifications to the hull that suggested it was designed for boarding operations rather than honest police work. Pirates, then. Or worse, slavers who'd gotten wind of Marcus's unusual cargo. Marcus activated the Persistence's hidden defensive systems. To outward appearances, she was just another beat-up cargo hauler. In reality, she mounted military-grade shields and a pair of concealed particle cannons that could punch through most civilian armor. The weapons powered up with a familiar hum that brought back memories Marcus had tried to forget. Memories of boarding hostile vessels in the dark between stars, of firefights in derelict stations, of decisions that had cost good people their lives. He'd sworn never to go back to that world. But some promises became meaningless when innocent lives were at stake. Unidentified vessel, this is Captain Harris of the patrol ship Retribution, came a transmission from their pursuer, Heave 2 for boarding and inspection. You are suspected of smuggling contraband in violation of colonial authority regulations. Marcus almost laughed at the transparent lie. The colonial authority had no jurisdiction in this sector, and no legitimate law enforcement would wait 6 hours to identify themselves. Patrol ship Retribution, this is the cargo hauler Persistence. Marcus replied, keeping his voice steady. I'm carrying legitimate freight with proper documentation. What's the nature of your suspicions? You're 3 days behind schedule on your delivery contract. Harris's voice came back. And your ship's manifests don't match our records. Prepare for boarding. So they did know about his cargo delay. That meant they had access to shipping databases which suggested either corporate backing or corrupt officials. Either way, They weren't going to be satisfied with a simple inspection. "Sorry, Harris, but I'm on a tight schedule," Marcus said. "I'll be filing a complaint with the authorities about this harassment." "There won't be any authorities where you're going, Chen." The use of his name confirmed Marcus's worst fears. They knew exactly who he was and what he was carrying. This wasn't a random intercept. It was a targeted operation. Marcus cut the communication channel and pushed the Persistence to maximum velocity. The pursuing ship responded immediately, closing the distance between them with alarming speed. "Warning shots," Marcus muttered, watching the tactical display. "They're trying to disable our engines." Bright beams of coherent light lanced past the Persistence's hull, close enough that the ship's radiation detectors screamed warnings. The next salvo wouldn't be a warning. Marcus rolled the ship suddenly, presenting its heavily armored belly to the attacker while he brought his own weapons to bear. The particle cannons emerged from their concealment, like predatory animals awakening from sleep. "What the hell?" Harris's voice came over the open channel, shock evident in his tone. "That's a civilian freighter." "Not anymore," Marcus said quietly, and opened fire. The Persistence's guns were smaller than those mounted on dedicated warships, but they were military-grade and Marcus knew how to use them. His first shots took out the patrol boat's forward shields, causing brilliant cascades of energy to ripple across their hull. The return fire was immediate and vicious. The Retribution was built for this kind of fight, its weapons designed to disable rather than destroy. They wanted their prize intact. Marcus had no such limitations. He rolled the ship again, evading a spread of ion torpedoes that would have crippled his engines. The Persistence might be disguised as a merchant vessel, but she moved like a fighter in Marcus's experienced hands. Every trick he'd learned in 20 years of combat came flooding back, as if no time had passed at all. The battle was fierce but brief. The Retribution's captain had expected an easy target, not a military-trained pilot flying a ship with hidden teeth. When Marcus's guns punched through their engine shielding and sent them spinning out of control, trailing plasma and debris, the fight was effectively over. "This is your final warning, Retribution," Marcus transmitted. "Break off your pursuit or the next shots go through your bridge." There was a long silence. Then Harris's voice came back, tight with pain and defeat. "We're breaking off. But this isn't over, Chen. There are others who know what you're carrying. They won't be as easy to discourage." The crippled patrol boat limped away, heading back toward whatever base had launched it. Marcus watched them go, feeling no satisfaction in the victory. He'd revealed his hand now, and there would be consequences. Word would spread that the cargo hauler Persistence was more than she appeared, carrying cargo valuable enough to fight for. Zara appeared in the cockpit doorway, her face pale but determined. "Is it over?" "For now," Marcus said, powering down the weapon systems. "But they'll be back. Or others like them will be." She moved to stand beside his chair, looking out at the stars with a maturity that seemed far beyond her years. "Because of me. Because some people are willing to hurt children for money," Marcus corrected firmly. "That's not your fault, Zara. That's theirs." She was quiet for a long moment. Then she asked the question Marcus had been dreading. "What happens now? Where do we go?" Marcus stared out at the vast emptiness of space, weighing their options. Perseverance Station was definitely out now. Too many people would be watching for them there. He could try to reach one of the frontier worlds, but their attackers had demonstrated resources and connections that suggested they could track the Persistence anywhere in civilized space, which left only one option. "How do you feel about meeting some friends of mine?" Marcus asked. "They're unconventional, but they owe me some favors, and they don't ask too many questions." "What kind of friends?" Marcus smiled grimly. "The kind who live outside the law and like it that way. The kind who take in strays and lost causes." He looked down at her. "The kind who might just help us disappear completely." Zara studied his face for a moment, then nodded. "I trust you, Marcus." Those simple words hit him harder than any weapon ever could. Somewhere in the past weeks, he'd stopped being just a rescuer and become something much more important. He'd become someone's protector, someone's family, someone's hope. It was a responsibility he'd never asked for, but one he was beginning to realize he'd been searching for his entire life. "Then hold on," Marcus said, setting course for a sector that didn't appear on any official star charts. "We're going to see some old friends, and then we're going to figure out how to give you the life you deserve." As the Persistence altered course away from the civilized shipping lanes, Marcus felt a strange sense of peace settle over him. He was returning to a world he'd tried to leave behind, but this time he wasn't running toward violence. This time, he was running towards something worth protecting. The graveyard wasn't marked on any official star charts, but every smuggler, pirate, and freedom fighter in 3 sectors knew how to find it. Hidden in the remnants of an ancient supernova, protected by radiation fields that would fry most navigation systems, it was where the galaxy's unwanted came to disappear. Marcus had been here before, back when he was running Black Ops missions for the Terran military. The place had served as a refuge for information brokers and rebel sympathizers, a neutral ground where enemies could meet without bloodshed. Now, as the Persistence navigated the treacherous approach through twisted metal and exotic energy fields, he wondered if his old contacts were still alive. "This place feels wrong," Zara said quietly from the co-pilot seat, her enhanced senses picking up things human instruments couldn't detect. "It's supposed to," Marcus replied, carefully threading their ship between the hulks of destroyed vessels that gave the graveyard its name. "The radiation here messes with sensors and communication arrays, makes it hard for unwelcome visitors to find what they're looking for."
As they penetrated deeper into the debris field, Marcus began transmitting an old recognition code, hoping someone would remember it.
The response came quickly, a narrow beam transmission that bypassed the radiation interference. Well, Marcus Chen, as I live and breathe. I figured you were dead by now." The voice belonged to Captain Elena Vasquez, a woman who'd once been his commanding officer and later become something like a friend. She'd disappeared from the official record 5 years ago, around the same time Marcus had left the service. Rumor had it she'd grown tired of following orders that sent good soldiers to die for political expediency. "Not dead yet, Elena. Though it's been a near thing lately. I heard about the excitement near the shipping lanes. Something about a cargo hauler with military-grade weapons teaching some slavers a lesson in manners." Marcus wasn't surprised that word had already spread. The graveyard's information network was better than most government intelligence services. "Can we talk in person? I've got a situation that requires some careful handling." There was a pause. Then Elena's voice came back with a slight edge to it. "We?" "Marcus, please tell me you didn't bring company to my safe haven. It's complicated. Can we dock?" Another pause. Longer this time. Marcus could imagine Elena weighing the risks against her curiosity and whatever loyalty she still felt for her former subordinate. Bay 7. "And Marcus? Whatever complications you're bringing me had better be worth disrupting the peace." The station that served as the graveyard's unofficial capital was a massive construct built from salvaged ship hulls and asteroid mining equipment. It looked like a metallic spiderweb stretched across the skeleton of a dead cruiser, all improvised connections and jury-rigged life support systems. But Marcus knew that beneath its chaotic appearance lay sophisticated defenses and a thriving community of people who'd chosen freedom over security. As the Persistent settled into the designated docking bay, Marcus turned to Zara, who was staring wide-eyed at the alien architecture visible through the viewports. "These people aren't like anyone you've met before," he warned her. "They're rough around the edges, and they don't trust easily. But they're good people in their own way. Just try not to be too obviously alien, okay?" Zara had fashioned a hooded cloak from one of Marcus's spare blankets, and with it pulled up around her head, her distinctive features were mostly hidden. It wouldn't fool close examination, but it might buy them some time. Elena was waiting for them at the airlock, a compact woman in her 50s with steel-grey hair and eyes that missed nothing. She'd aged since Marcus had last seen her, new lines around her eyes speaking of hard decisions and harder losses. But her grip was still firm when she clasped his hand in greeting. "You look like hell, Marcus," she said with a slight smile. "Cargo hauling not agreeing with you? It has its moments." Marcus gestured to Zara, who stood quietly at his side with her hood pulled low. "Elena, I'd like you to meet Zara. She's family." Elena's trained eye immediately catalogued the small figure's unusual proportions and careful posture. "Family, is she? That's an interesting development." She gestured for them to follow her. "Come on, my office is more private, and something tells me this conversation is going to need privacy." They walked through corridors that buzzed with activity. The graveyard's residents were a diverse lot. Humans, yes, but also representatives of a dozen other species, all united by their shared status as outcasts. Marcus saw Zara's eyes widen as she took in the mix of beings around them, some more exotic than anything she'd likely encountered in her sheltered diplomatic life. Elena's office was spartanly functional, dominated by multiple monitor screens showing sensor feeds from around the station. She sealed the door and activated a privacy field before turning to face them. "All right," she said. "Let's see what kind of trouble you've brought to my doorstep." Zara slowly pushed back her hood, revealing her pale blue features and large, dark eyes. Eleanor's expression didn't change, but Marcus saw her hand drift unconsciously toward the weapon at her hip. "Veltar," she said quietly. "A young one by the look of it. Marcus, do you have any idea how many people are looking for this child right now?" "Some idea," Marcus admitted. "We had a run-in with slavers 2 days ago. They knew who she was and where to find us. I'll bet they did." Elena moved to one of her monitors and began calling up information. "There's been chatter on the intelligence networks for the past week. A Veltar diplomatic vessel went missing near the Centauri storm. Officially, it was lost with all hands. Unofficially, certain parties have been offering substantial rewards for information about survivors." "What kind of parties?" "The worst kind. Bio-research corporations looking for test subjects. Private collectors who want exotic slaves. Military contractors who think they can extract state secrets from a child's memory." Elena's expression was grim. "There's also a small faction of Veltar extremists who consider her a traitor to her species for associating with humans. They want her back for... disciplinary purposes." Zara had been listening intently, her grasp of English now good enough to follow most of the conversation. Marcus saw her small hands clench into fists, but she remained silent. "So what are our options?" Marcus asked. "Honestly, not many." Elena called up a star chart. "The civilized sectors are all compromised. Too many people looking for you. The frontier colonies might work, but you'd always be looking over your shoulders. And eventually, someone would get lucky." "What about here?" "The graveyard's hidden from most searches." Elena shook her head. "This place works because it's neutral ground. The moment I harbor a high-value target like her, that neutrality disappears. I'd have every bounty hunter and corporate strike team in the sector converging on this location. I can't risk the safety of everyone here for one person, Marcus. Not even for you." Marcus felt something cold settle in his stomach. He'd known this was a long shot, but hearing it confirmed left him feeling lost. Where could they go? How could they escape an enemy with unlimited resources and galactic reach?
However, Elena continued, there might be another option. She activated another display, showing what looked like a deep space navigation chart.
But this one was marked with coordinates that didn't correspond to any known star systems. "What am I looking at?" Marcus asked. "Ever hear of Sanctuary?" Marcus had heard whispers, rumors shared in the darkest corners of the galaxy's underworld. A hidden world where the hunted could find shelter, protected by technology and secrecy beyond anything the major powers could deploy. Most people dismissed it as wishful thinking, a fairy tale told by desperate fugitives. I thought that was a myth. So does most of the galaxy, which is how it stays hidden. Elena's expression was serious. "It's real, Marcus. A place where species don't matter, where the only law is mutual protection. They take in refugees, political dissidents, anyone who needs to disappear permanently. If it exists, why haven't you gone there?" Elena smiled sadly. "Because this place needs someone to run it. And because some of us are meant to fight, not hide." She looked at Zara, her expression softening slightly. "But children deserve better than a lifetime of running." "What's the catch?" Marcus asked. "There was always a catch. Getting there isn't easy. The approach routes change regularly, and you need current navigation codes that cost more than most people can afford. Plus, once you're there permanently. Sanctuary doesn't allow departures. Too risky for everyone's security." Marcus looked down at Zara, who had been following the conversation with intense concentration. Her large eyes met his, and he saw no fear there, only a quiet determination that reminded him painfully of her lost parents. "What do you think?" he asked her quietly. "Together?" she asked simply. "Together." She nodded firmly. "Then yes." Elena observed this exchange with something that might have been approval. "All right then. But this won't be cheap or easy. The navigation codes alone will cost you everything you have, and the journey is dangerous. Ships have been lost trying to reach Sanctuary." "What do you need?" Elena named a figure that made Marcus wince. It was nearly everything he'd saved over 20 years of cargo hauling, but looking at Zara's trusting face, he knew there was really no choice. "Done. How long will it take to arrange?" "Give me 48 hours. I'll need to contact some very discreet brokers." Elena's expression grew serious. "Marcus, I want you to understand what you're doing here. Once you leave for Sanctuary, you can never come back. No contact with your old life, no messages to family, nothing. As far as the galaxy is concerned, you'll both be dead." Marcus thought of his sister Sarah, safe on Terra Nueva with her family. He'd miss her, but she had her own life now. His parents were gone and he had no close friends outside of the dangerous world he was leaving behind. The only family that really mattered was standing right beside him. I understand. The next 2 days passed in a blur of preparation and nervous waiting. Marcus sold his cargo contracts and liquidated his few investments, converting everything to the untraceable currency favored by the graveyard's merchants. He also upgraded the Persistence's systems one last time, installing military-grade life support and navigation equipment that would be essential for the journey ahead. Zara spent the time exploring the station with wide-eyed wonder, protected by a small group of Elena's people who'd been briefed on the situation. She was particularly fascinated by the station's multi-species community, asking countless questions about the various beings they encountered. Her natural curiosity and quick intelligence won her friends wherever she went. On the second evening, as Marcus was finalizing the financial arrangements, Zara found him in the station's observation lounge, staring out at the stellar graveyard that surrounded them. "Scared?" she asked, settling beside him on the bench. "Terrified," Marcus admitted. "I'm taking you away from everything you've ever known, to a place we know almost nothing about." "What if it's not what we hope? What if something goes wrong?" Zara was quiet for a moment. Then she spoke in careful English. "My parents, they taught me that family isn't about blood or species, it's about choice. About people who choose to love you and protect you, even when it's hard." She took his larger hand in her small one. "You chose to save me when you could have flown away. You chose to fight for me when it was dangerous. You choose to stay with me now, even though it costs everything." She looked up at him with those impossibly expressive eyes. "That makes you family. Real family." Marcus felt something tight in his chest loosen, replaced by a warmth he hadn't felt since childhood. "Yeah," he said quietly. "Real family." The next morning, Elena provided them with the precious navigation codes and a warning. The route to Sanctuary takes you through some of the most dangerous space in the galaxy. Rogue AI territory, collapsed stars, spatial anomalies that can tear a ship apart. But if you make it through, you'll be safe. Both of you. As they prepared to depart, Elena pulled Marcus aside one last time. "For what it's worth, I think you're doing the right thing. That child has been through hell, but she's strong. With the right guidance, she could become something extraordinary." "She already is," Marcus said. Elena smiled. "Yeah, I can see that. Take care of yourself, old friend. And Marcus, when you reach Sanctuary, don't look back. Whatever life you build there, make it a good one." The Persistence undocked from the graveyard station and began the careful navigation back through the debris fields. As they cleared the last of the wreckage and entered open space, Marcus felt a strange mixture of fear and anticipation. Ahead lay the unknown, a journey more dangerous than anything he'd ever attempted. But beside him sat Zara, her face bright with excitement and trust, and suddenly, the future didn't seem quite so frightening. They were going home. They just had to find it first. The journey to Sanctuary took them through regions of space that existed on no official charts, where the laws of physics seemed more like suggestions and reality itself grew thin. For 3 weeks, Marcus navigated by coordinates that shifted according to complex algorithms, following a route that doubled back on itself and passed through phenomena that shouldn't exist. They encountered the remnants of an ancient war in the Whisper Nebula, where automated defense systems still fired at anything that moved. Marcus had to use every trick he'd learned in 20 years of military service to slip past sensors that had been hunting for enemies dead 1,000 years. In the Shattered Zone, they passed through a region where space itself had been torn by some unimaginable catastrophe, creating pockets of altered time where seconds stretched into hours, and cause followed effect in impossible sequences. Zara proved invaluable here, her alien senses able to detect the temporal distortions before they trapped the ship. But the worst was the AI graveyard, where the shells of massive artificial intelligences drifted like technological ghosts. Some were still partially active, their distributed consciousness spread across miles of quantum processors, dreaming electronic dreams of conquest and transcendence. One of them noticed the Persistence and tried to communicate, flooding their systems with data streams that threatened to overwhelm the ship's computers. Marcus had to physically disconnect the navigation system to break the connection, leaving them flying blind through a field of potentially hostile artificial minds. Through it all, Zara proved to be the perfect traveling companion. She was endlessly curious about everything they encountered, asking questions that often helped Marcus see problems from new angles. Her quick intelligence and intuitive grasp of spatial relationships made her a natural navigator, and her calm presence helped keep Marcus centered when the stress of their dangerous journey threatened to overwhelm him. They talked about everything during those long weeks in hyperspace. Zara told him about Veltar culture, their complex family structures, their reverence for harmony and balance. She described the world where she'd been born, with its singing crystal forests and cities that floated on antigrav fields among the clouds. Marcus, in turn, shared stories of Earth, of the blue skies and endless oceans that had shaped humanity's dreams. He told her about his sister Sarah, about the games they'd played as children, and the fights they'd had as teenagers. He found himself opening up about his military service, about the friends he'd lost and the decisions that still haunted his dreams. "Do you ever regret leaving that life?" Zara asked one day as they traveled through a region where the stars were arranged in perfectly geometric patterns, artificial constellations created by some long-dead civilization. Marcus considered the question seriously. "I regret the violence. I regret the people who died because of orders I followed or gave. But I don't regret serving with good people who are trying to make the galaxy a safer place. Like you're doing now?" Marcus looked at her with surprise. "What do you mean? You saved me. You protected me. You're taking me somewhere safe even though it cost you everything." She smiled, that musical trill that had become so familiar. "That sounds like making the galaxy safer to me." On the 22nd day of their journey, the navigation computer announced they had reached their final destination. Marcus stared at the sensor displays in confusion. There was nothing here, no planets, no stations, just empty space with a few scattered asteroids. "Are we lost?" Zara asked, studying the readings with equal puzzlement. Before Marcus could answer, space itself seemed to ripple around them. Reality folded like origami, revealing something that had been hidden behind layers of sophisticated camouflage. Where there had been empty space moments before, now hung a world. It was unlike anything Marcus had ever seen. The planet's surface was a patchwork of different biomes, temperate forests blending into crystalline deserts, floating islands connected by bridges of solidified energy, seas that seemed to be made of liquid starlight. Cities dotted the landscape, each one built in the architectural style of a different species, creating a mad quilt of domes and spires and impossible geometries. "Welcome to Sanctuary," came a voice over the communication system. It was transmitted in perfect English, but underneath Marcus could hear harmonic overtones that suggested it was being simultaneously broadcast in dozens of languages. "Please state your business."
"We're refugees," Marcus replied.
"We have authorization codes from Elena Vasquez." There was a pause, then the voice returned with noticeably warmer tones. "Elena sends her regards. You are cleared for approach. Please follow the guidance beacons to landing bay 7. As they descended through the planet's atmosphere, Marcus and Zara pressed their faces to the viewports like excited children. The closer they got, the more incredible Sanctuary appeared. The cities weren't just built in different styles. They housed different species. Marcus saw tall, crystalline beings that might have been silicon-based life forms walking alongside creatures that looked like living clouds of gas. In one plaza, a group of children from at least 6 different species played together with apparent joy. "It's beautiful," Zara breathed, her eyes wide with wonder. The landing bay they were directed to was a massive structure that seemed to be carved from a single piece of green stone. As the Persistent settled onto the designated pad, Marcus saw welcoming committees from several different species waiting to greet them. Their primary contact turned out to be a human woman in her 30s, with kind eyes and prematurely grey hair. She introduced herself as Dr. Sarah Winters, Sanctuary's coordinator for new arrivals. "Welcome to your new home," she said as they disembarked. "I know this must all seem overwhelming, but I promise we'll help you adjust at your own pace." She led them through the welcoming process, which was surprisingly thorough. Medical examinations to ensure they weren't carrying any dangerous diseases, psychological evaluations to assess their integration potential, and detailed interviews about their backgrounds and skills. "We're completely self-sufficient here," Dr. Winters explained as she showed them around the central district. "Everyone contributes according to their abilities. Marcus, your pilot training and technical skills will be very valuable. We're always in need of people who can maintain and operate our defense systems. And Zara," she paused, studying the young Veltar with professional interest, "your linguistic abilities and cultural knowledge will be incredibly useful. We have several Veltar communities here, but none with your diplomatic background. You could serve as a cultural liaison, helping other refugees from your species integrate more easily." They were assigned temporary quarters in a residential complex designed to accommodate multiple species. Their apartment was spacious and comfortable, with adjustable environmental controls and furniture that could be reconfigured for different body types. The walls were transparent aluminum, offering a stunning view of the city and the strange, beautiful landscape beyond. "How long do we have to decide if we want to stay?" Marcus asked as Dr. Winters prepared to leave them to settle in. She gave him a puzzled look. "I'm sorry. I don't understand. You're here, which means you've already decided to stay. Sanctuary doesn't allow departures, remember? For security reasons." Marcus felt a moment of panic. Intellectually, he'd known this, but the reality was suddenly hitting him. They really were cut off from the galaxy forever. Dr. Winters seemed to sense his distress. "I know it's frightening at first. Everyone goes through this adjustment period. But look around you, Marcus. Look at the people here. They're not prisoners. They're citizens of a world where species doesn't matter, where everyone is valued for who they are rather than what they look like or where they come from." She gestured towards the window, where they could see children of a dozen different species playing in a park below. This is what the galaxy could be, if fear and prejudice didn't get in the way. "You've brought something precious here. A chance for a child to grow up free of the hatred and violence that destroyed her family. Isn't that worth any sacrifice?" That night, as they sat on their apartment's balcony watching Sanctuary's 3 moons rise over the alien landscape, Zara asked the question Marcus had been dreading. "Do you regret it, giving up everything to come here?" Marcus looked out at the incredible vista before them, cities that blended seamlessly with natural wonders, beings from across the galaxy living in harmony, children playing without fear. He thought about the persistence, which would be refitted and given to someone else who needed transportation. He thought about his old life, running cargo between stars that grew lonelier with each passing year. Then he looked at Zara, who was watching him with those large, intelligent eyes that had learned to trust him completely. In the months since he'd pulled her from that dying ship, she'd become the center of his universe. Not because he'd saved her, but because she'd saved him from a life without meaning. "No," he said quietly. "I don't regret it. This feels like home." Zara smiled and leaned against his shoulder, content to watch the alien stars wheel overhead. "Good. Because I think we have work to do here." "Work?" She gestured toward the city below, where the lights of 1,000 different cultures created a tapestry of wonder. "There are other children out there, lost and scared like I was. Other people who need someone to come find them in the storm." Marcus understood. Sanctuary was more than just a refuge. It was a beacon of hope for anyone who'd been cast out by an uncaring universe. And they were part of that now, part of something larger than themselves. "You're right," he said. "We do have work to do." Years passed. Marcus became one of Sanctuary's most skilled rescue pilots, venturing out into the dangerous galaxy to retrieve refugees and guide them home. Zara grew into a brilliant young woman, using her unique perspective as someone who'd experienced both the worst and best of interspecies relations to help build bridges between communities. Their story became something of a legend on Sanctuary, the human who'd risked everything to save an alien child, and the child who'd grown up to save others in return. But Marcus knew the real story was simpler than that. It was the story of a man who'd been lost in the darkness between stars until he found someone worth protecting. It was the story of a child who'd lost everything, but found a new family in the most unexpected place. It was the story of 2 beings from different worlds who'd discovered that love transcends species, culture, and circumstance. On quiet evenings, when they sat together watching Sanctuary's impossible sunsets, Marcus would sometimes think back to that moment in the cosmic storm when he'd made the decision to help a dying ship. One choice, made in a handful of seconds, had changed both their lives forever. He'd gone into that storm thinking he was saving a life. He'd discovered instead that sometimes, when you reach out to save someone else, you end up saving yourself. And in a universe often cold and unforgiving, that was a truth worth sharing. The alien child had been frozen in the storm until a human came to save her. But in the end, they'd saved each other, proving that hope could flourish even in the darkest corners of space. Their story became a testament to the power of compassion, the strength of chosen family, and the truth that sometimes the greatest journeys begin with a simple decision to help someone in need. In Sanctuary, where beings from across the galaxy lived in harmony, their legacy continued through every child they helped find safety, every refugee they guided home, and every person who learned that in the vast cosmos, we are never truly alone, as long as someone cares enough to brave the storm.